Hello and welcome to Scientist Warning TV. And today I'm really pleased to have with me two students who have been super active in a recent fossil fuel divestment campaign at their university. So I have with me Yvonne Chakraborty and Amy Shapcott-Hall, who both happen to be at the Open University. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Open University is, it's the largest online provider of educational courses in the UK. Set up in the late 1960s. And for many people, for many of us in the UK, we see the Open University as a bit of a national treasure because it has long had a policy of open access and welcoming students from all kinds of backgrounds. In fact, one of my friends actually once said to me that there was one of the things that he would actually die for in terms of trying to keep it was the fact the Open University, which is a huge compliment, I think, to what it's achieved and how it's held in so positively in public regard in the UK. Welcome to, and super to have you both here to talk with me. One question I'd like to put to you first, Yvonne, if I may, is why do you think it's so important that academic institutions divest from fossil fuels?
I think academic institutions have got a real voice in this. I think we look to them for leadership, and I think this is a time that we need leadership. I think also many students, like Amy and myself, are on environmental pathways at universities, and it's a little bit difficult for them to teach us about the climate crisis and then continue to profit from fossil fuels. And I think also there's a wider issue with preparing other students. I think no matter what discipline you're involved in, I think the climate crisis is going to be an issue. So, it's really incumbent on them to walk the walk as well as talking the talk. And I think furthermore, for universities investment committees for universities considering their fiduciary duty, I think the threat of stranded assets becomes an increasing issue. And I think fossil fuel investments are looking increasingly risky. If you take all of the climate stuff out of it and just purely look at it in financial terms, those investments look increasingly risky. So I think there are many reasons why universities should engage with this.
Absolutely. And it's a global issue as well, isn't it? And as you say, it's really about institutions, not just talking the talk and engaging in blah, 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 but it's really important that they walk the walk and that because universities are held in such high regard and because they're trusted, academic voices and scientists' voices are so trusted. That it's super important that at the institutional level that they reflect back the integrity and authenticity in terms of their processes and what they're actually doing. So just to give us an idea of why this is so important, large sums of money are at stake here, aren't they? So in terms of the money the revenue that comes to institutions, which is also a super risk, as you put it, because if fossil fuel organisations end up having to deal with stranded assets, this is massively problematic. So would you like to say something, Yvonne, about the financial side to this?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to note that over 60% of UK universities are now divesting, and that's 91 universities, and they have committed about £15 billion to divestment. And that's made up of smaller sums and larger sums. It's kind of reflected globally, pan-sector, with about $14.5 trillion committed for divestment. And I think each divestment commitment brings its own thing to the divestment story. So like I know Harvard it's the richest university in the world. It's recently committed $42 billion to divestment. And then, that's significant for lots of reasons. But then you have a university like Aberdeen, which is so historically connected with oil money and oil jobs. And whereas they're divesting a smaller amount of money, the fact that they are divesting is incredibly significant. And so it's not always about the amount of money, but it is it's all pooling together into a joint effort and a joint statement, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and you're right, it's not necessarily about the amount of money, but it's about the message that sends. So, the Aberdeen example is a really important one because of the close contacts they've had for decades with North Sea oil and gas. And we might come back to the other kinds of contacts that institutions still maintain with the oil industry, which are not necessarily with the oil and gas industry, which might not necessarily be so obvious. But your recent campaign was incredibly explosive because the decision to divest was made very, very rapidly, which suggests that you were unbelievably successful in doing that. You had a shout out from Bill McKibben, and from all sorts of people, obviously congratulating you on what must have been a super successful campaign. Right, so turning to you now, Amy, I wonder if you could say something about the way in which these divestment campaigns are being reported in the media.
So there's been different angles taken by the media. It's been mostly positive in terms of how it's captured people's attention, or apparently captured people's attention. A BBC article released yesterday found that a poll of over 30,000 people, that 56% of them want a strong action from governments at COP26 and want a strong representation. And in civil society, universities play a key role in that action.
So there was a recent report which showed that amongst young people, their fears about the future and the incidence of something called eco-anxiety has been increasing. And so something like 60% now of young people are profoundly concerned about the climate and ecological crisis, which is something that you guys must see amongst your peers because you're current students. So, Yvonne, if I can come back to you then to talk about the recent campaign that you've been a part of at the OU, and just to talk about campaigning in general.
Yeah. Well, I will say that really I think the foundations of the campaign were built on collaboration and networking, and we built on an earlier campaign that had got to a certain point and then paused. So we started in February, and we started with really, trying to take the temperature among students particularly, but also to try to get an understanding of what the sentiment was towards fossil fuel divestment at Open University. We then decided that there was definitely enough interest to take forward a campaign, and we built on an earlier petition, getting it to 1,000 signatures before bringing it to the Open University management and saying that we wanted to start having conversation with them about this. As part of that process, we tried to find out what was happening in the wider sector. We looked at what was happening with other universities, and we really got a sense of a terrific amount of momentum within divestment within the higher education sector. So we got also very good advice from and made good connections with lots of different student groups. The Open University is an unusual university in that we very often don't meet. So bizarrely, Amy and I have never physically met in person. We haven't met with the other people who we've worked closely with on this campaign. And that throws up its own challenges. But in another way, there are advantages to it in that there are lots of groups with different interests at Open University that we could connect with through social media. There are also a lot of motivated staff who are very engaged with environmental issues. We got very good support from People and Planet, the student campaigning organisation. We also did our research. We looked really at what the Open University's position was on this. And we found to our surprise that as recently as 2019, the Open University had produced a document laying out its position on responsible investment, which essentially said that what they would do is give their money to fund managers with good ESG credentials, putting the onus on them to make sure that the investment was ethical, and essentially not requiring screening from any sector or removal of any sector from the investments. So we thought that was a really unusual position, first of all, to be holding in 2019 when much of the rest of the sector was pretty much racing to divest, and also, you know, coming from a university making documentaries with Greta Thunberg, it just felt a bit weird. So we went and met with some of the senior leadership and highlighted this to them. And what we got really was not a sense of anybody denying the climate crisis or being incredibly entrenched in absolutely wanting to keep fossil fuels, investments at Open University, but more maybe a case of kind of siloed activity where this council did this and this council did this, and perhaps people weren't quite as aware of some moves in the wider sector or the kinds of research that were coming out of Open University. And there was a sense of wanting to engage with it. But as you know, Open University, by student numbers, the biggest university in the UK, it's a bit of a big ship to turn around. So it was definitely going to take a while. And I guess we kept up dialogue. And we were always approaching it from a constructive position of really, we love our university. We have a vested interest in making sure it has a good reputation. But we were very aware of the need for speed. You know, if you look at Carbon Tracker's figures, our carbon budget to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming is about 540 gigatons of carbon. And we are chucking out almost 42 a year, which gives us not very many years. And that's only like a 50% chance of staying within 1.5. If you take that down to a lower order of magnitude of something more certain, it's more like 300. And yet again, we're chucking out nearly 42 a year. So it's not, we didn't really feel it was something that we could wait around a lot for. So we did note that a lot of other universities were using COP as a focal point for their divestment action and divesting in time for COP, or actually saying, well, we know we said that we would divest in 3 years or 5 years or whatever. We've actually divested 2 years early and we've done it in time for COP. So we decided to use that as a bit of a focal point, and essentially to use social media as a space where students could really let the Open University understand the depth of feeling around this. And we were just thrilled to get divestment announcement days before COP. So, but I will say it was built on a foundation of bucket loads of help from loads of people over years, people who came before us and had left the university by the time we even got here, and also all the work of all the other students and all the other campaigns that spurred us on. So it was really a team effort.
It's very noticeable that students globally are networking around these issues, and I think that's, you know, you do have quite literally strength in numbers. Those networks are super important. And they're super powerful too. I often say when I speak to students, you know, you have much more power than you might actually be aware of. I just want to go back to something that that we sort of touched on earlier, and it's about sort of walking the walk and talking the talk. Now, research in the US, Ben Franta has done one PhD on the history of science, and I think he's doing a second one in law. And what he has been doing unbelievably systematically and rigorously has been going through thousands and thousands of documents and documenting the connections that fossil fuel companies have with higher education institutions. And it's absolutely incredibly striking just how deep those connections go. So it isn't just around the where universities have invested and so forth, but the tentacles, if you like, of the fossil fuel organisations extend into curriculum, extend into career services. And I just want to give you an example, because you mentioned Aberdeen University earlier, and so I say there's not, we're not trying to sort of demonise any particular institution, but it's an example of what seems to be an inherent sort of hypocrisy in a sense within academia. So on the one hand, you have these incredible scientists who are talking and doing the research and showing that there is a climate and ecological emergency, working within institutions that are in some cases quite happily proactively promoting careers in petroleum engineering, for example. And these don't stack up. So I wondered if you could say something about what you think academic institutions could do more of in order to demonstrate that they really are walking the walk in this regard. I don't know which one of you might want to take that, or maybe you both want to jump in and comment on that one.
I'm happy to begin.
Thanks, Amy.
Well, taking the Open University as an example, they already do, as we've already said, so much great stuff. They've got so much content on OpenLearn, which is their resource for free articles and courses and such. We are both environmental students, so we are being taught these things about the climate crisis, about the urgency of it, about why rapid action is really needed. So divestment and also instead of passively talking about this, actively taking that role, not promoting the careers, as you said, not investing, and then continuing to encourage students to be activists themselves in this matter. I don't know what else you think, Yvonne.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with all of the points you made, Amy. We're here because our university is educating us on these matters. And in a way, it's like the most logical thing for us to do with that education is to kind of start with our university and apply what we've learned. But I think, I think the Open University in many ways is a great example of a university that engages with research in, whether it's in climate finance or in agricultural practices or whatever. It's making documentaries to engage the public. It's providing that Open Learn service, which is free. But I think, and I know that they are also doing work around looking at the sustainability of their buildings. I think they're, I guess, maybe like a microcosm of so many other industries, sectors, in that I think every sector has to engage with this. And I think the universities can look at best practice in other sectors, and other sectors will look at best practice in universities. But this whole thing is really a team sport. I recently saw some lectures run by the Royal Society of Medicine on climate change, and they ran a series of 10 lectures, and at the start of the first one they made the point that doctors can no longer stand by and say, well, I'm too busy saving my patients to engage with the climate crisis. Their point was that the climate crisis will be affecting everybody's patients because it'll affect human health. And they made the point that doctors will be seeing this before anybody else. And their ask was for doctors to speak truth to power, make sure that they were acting in environmentally conscious and sustainable ways in their own lives, and then talk to their patients about that. And I think you may find similar things happening within architecture, within food. And where are we learning? We're learning in our academic institutions. So I think our universities have to engage with this extremely broadly. It can't just be, and now we've divested and that's fine, we've done it. I think it has to be across policy, across the institution, across the curriculum, because this is the biggest challenge of our age, really.
That is, you make that point incredibly well, and of course, I couldn't agree more. What we sometimes feel is that the burden sort of sits with climate scientists and with the ecologists because they have researched these areas, but it isn't the case that the burden actually sits with them, because I think there's a bigger case to answer, if you like, for academia, which is, how did we get into this mess? Because if you guys have been doing the research over decades that has been showing us that we have been hurtling towards the edge of a cliff, why are we at the point where we still haven't applied the brakes? What's gone wrong? And that is a completely separate discussion. But you're right. And I mean, yes, educational institutions do need to walk the walk. And at the moment in the UK, of course, there's this enormous controversy around the connections that certain other educational institutions have with fossil fuel organisations. Of course, this is in sharp focus at the moment with the Science Museum, which having been part of an association with Shell, which was hugely criticised, very controversial, and led to the resignation of Professor Chris Rapley, who was in fact formerly the director of the Science Museum. And yet, having done that, the Science Museum then actually announced an association with Adani, which of course is, and it's, Adani is a big conglomeration with, coal interests in Australia and of course renewable interests in India. And it's been massively controversial, and I think the position of the activists there is that you simply should not work with fossil fuel companies at all, full stop. I just wondered if you had if as part of a student body, whether you had any thoughts or reflections on what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it as a student, but actually I'd also like to talk about it as a mum. One of the reasons that I have ended up doing what I'm doing is because I have got 3 children, and I'm mindful about what life is going to be like for them in decades to come. And before I started on this journey, one instant really springs to mind. I'd gone to quite a number of years ago now, like I'd say at least 5 years ago, I went to Excel to the New Scientist show at Excel. And when I arrived there, realized that one of the big sponsors was, I can't remember if it was BP or Shell. It was one of them. I think it was BP. Anyway, and so, engaged with all of the various talks and the various stands. And we were walking past, myself and my children were walking past this particular fossil fuel company stand, and a presenter kind of grabbed one of my daughters and said, would you like to come and see what I'm doing? It's really interesting. I've got the story to show you. And so my then, I think, 10-year-old daughter said, yeah, okay. So we went onto this stand, and this woman said, so I'm a geologist, and what I do is I help oil companies work out where the oil is underneath the sea, usually. And she had this sort of cool little graphic thing, and there's a little scientist going down, and it looks a bit like a video game. And so my daughter, and I think my 2 daughters, stood there and listened, and the woman said, and it's a really exciting, interesting career. So, we need more women in it, and it's a great supporter of women. So I'd really love if you, would think about doing this. And my daughters nodded along patiently. And when we left the stand, and my little one just turned around and went, oh, Mummy, I feel so sorry for that lady. Does she really think that we think that's a cool thing? Does she not know that, as a 10-year-old, I know that she's contributing to the destruction of the planet. And it was really a light bulb moment for me, because I don't think I would have really spent that much time talking about that with my children at that point. They had obviously learned it from school or wherever. And I was thinking, wow,
that's absolutely awesome.
You know, if my 10-year-old can spot this, like, the oil companies are on a loser here. And so, like, I think, you know, the oil companies can sponsor however many science museums they want, but ultimately it's a bit like Blockbuster Video sponsoring a museum in a way, because they're kind of becoming irrelevant. You know, in 20 years' time, how is that going to look? You think now about how historical funding for universities that came from slavery, how is that looked on? You know, or sugar plantations or diamonds or whatever. In 20 years' time, 5 years' time, 50 years' time, what does that look like for the Science Museum? It's not really great, is it? And, you know, you see now there's people occupying it and queuing up outside to protest. I don't know what they think they're going to achieve, but I'm not entirely certain it's going to meet either the aims of Adnani or the Science Museum.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly moving to hear you talk about that and giving the example of your daughter, and also absolutely incredible that these young children are increasingly aware, because they're not getting this education through schools. They're actually getting it through Fridays for Future and the schools movement. So that's just an incredible observation on your part there. I'd just like to turn to both of you now to say something about you've obviously both had time to reflect on this incredible success you've had with the OU. What more would you like to see academic institutions do so that they are arguably not a part of the problem, but actually increasingly collaborating to be part of the, I hesitate to say solution, but so that they're fit for future purpose? Who would like to start with that one?
I'm happy to start with that. I would say that we've all joined this because we're passionate about learning and about the environment and environmental issues and combating them. We went to the Open University to gain the skills and the qualification so we can make a difference in this field. And yet, when I found out about this personally, there was a sense of guilt, and that's eco-anxiety, depression, those feelings arose. I wanted to feel proud to be part of my institution, and in many ways I am. But it's a shame that it took student activism to get to this point, but it has. And I think universities and institutions should get on board and understand that their students, many of them, are very passionate about this, that the world is in a critical condition, and that they have they're so influential, and they have so much power that they can become active players in curbing this. So yes, that's
great. Thank you. So, and I agree. It's always moving to hear young people talking and students talking about their experiences of eco-anxiety. Because you should not be subjected to harm. Yvonne, some final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really echo what Amy said. This is a campaign that's taken quite a bit of time, and actually we could all do with getting back to our studies. At points we were really thinking, why do we have to even do this? But given that we did engage with it, I do think one thing I would say to other students of institutions is that a small number of students can make a big difference. You have to bring a lot of people with you, but ultimately it is within your gift to action things that you feel passionately about. And as for institutions, I would say there's lots that's happening within institutions that's good and inspiring and positive and innovative. I think something that will help drive that forward is including as many voices as possible. I think a lot of institutions, by way of being institutions, tend to have maybe less voices in some areas of how they work, and I think really bringing in as many different types of people to have a say in this is really important, and I think it is very much about that consistency of action across the entire sphere of activity of universities, and also reaching out and extending that further and seeing what can be done. We're in the UK and globally recovering from a COVID pandemic, which has really impacted the education of so many young people. I think Open Learn is a brilliant example of a university's ability to reach out and extend the opportunities that they can offer to the wider society. I think there's definite gaps in the curriculum in our primary and secondary schools, and also, beyond, in terms of educational, environmental education. And I think universities could really be at the forefront of helping fill that, helping work with that. And I would love to see more of that engagement really coming from universities.
Those are all really important points. And I think you're right about having, it's important not to engage in virtue signalling. I think it's important that voices, your voices are represented, reflected, and that you're listened to. I think that's super important. And ultimately the point about, what young people, actually want, because given that students and prospective students are now so concerned about what's happening with the climate and ecological crisis, it's really only a matter of time before their behaviour in terms of their course choices actually follow suit, and that that information will start to inform the kinds of institutions they're going to look for, the kinds of courses they're going to look for. And it's a threat, but it's also a huge opportunity for institutions to actually anticipate what's coming down the tracks, and then to be there for the young people of the future. So I've really enjoyed talking to you both. You're both incredibly inspiring. It's, you've run this incredible campaign. I'm constantly inspired and humbled by the work of student activists and young people, and also feel quite guilty that you guys are doing the work that other people should in some sense be doing. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us this platform as well, and the work that you do.
You're welcome.